afternoon. I'm Mary Lee Anderson, Executive Director of Senior Services of Alexandria. And on behalf of Senior Services and the Alexandria Bar Association, I'd like to welcome you to the second session of the 9th Annual Senior Law Day. We're very excited to be able to present this event in a virtual format. When SSA and the Bar Association began planning for this event last year, we never imagined how relevant our theme would be. And our panelists are going to be sharing important information that is going to help older adults decide, should I stay or should I go? Housing options as we age. Before I introduce this week's panelists, I want to go over a few important details. The event is being recorded so that we can share the information at a later date. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and be sure to get them in early so that the panelists can answer as many as possible at the end of the presentations. Last week, everybody waited till the last minute, so it was hard to get all those questions answered. So be sure to put them in as you think of them. Please don't put questions in the chat box, put them in Q&A so that we can see them all in one consolidated place. Everyone registered for this event will receive an email with links to the presentations and other important resources, and we'll also post them on SSA's website. And now I'd like to introduce you to our three panelists. Tom West is a partner in the wealth management firm Signature Investment and Estate Planning Advisors, and is a longtime friend of SSA and trusted speaker for many of our events. Tom is also the creator of the Life Care Affordability Plan, a single-fee analytical resource that helps seniors and their families decide the best ways to pay for care and housing in retirement. Natalie Page is a principal attorney at Life and Estate Planning Law Center. Natalie's practice includes the areas of estate planning and administration, trust administration, Medicaid issues, and incapacity planning, including guardianships and conservatorships. Helen McIlvaine has been Alexandria's housing director since 2015. Helen leads implementation of the city's housing master plan, develops citywide housing policy and investment strategies, and supports planning initiatives to increase the preservation and production of affordable housing. She works with nonprofit and private developers, as well as the Alexandria Redevelopment and Housing Authority, to structure and finance developments that include affordable housing. I'd like to congratulate Helen, as she was honored last night as the 2020 Regional Housing Leader by the Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance. Now, let's get started. Tom West will be our first speaker. Tom, take it away.
Here I am. All right, welcome everybody. Sorry, it took me a second to log back in. I had some technical problems on the front end. My responsibility as our lead-off speaker today is to talk to the audience about all of the challenges and potentially the most effective ways through the difficult decisions involving money and the possibility of needing long-term care in different types of settings of receiving that help, whether you're in your own home or you have to think about a transition somewhere else. And Marshall, go ahead to that first slide, please. Next one. So the graphic here, everybody, is an acknowledgement of the new reality that seniors are facing in the middle of 2020 with COVID-19. And what this graph really represents is, think of all the things that a senior has to make decisions on all at the same time, making care decisions, who has the authority or the willingness or the competence to be able to make those decisions? Are we thinking of planning for the needs of care right now or potentially sometime in the future? There's certainly all of the healthcare events now or down the road that we have to consider about mobility or dementia, things like that. And then what is the care setting? Is it in my own home? Is it in something like an assisted living facility or somewhere else? What's the best setting for me? And before going to the next slide, let's acknowledge that the reality of COVID-19 has changed the way that families have to make decisions across all of these dimensions. But this is what's happening in the environment. The next slide, Marshall, tells us a little bit about what's going on in our households. How family dynamics can impact the way that families make decisions. Who's in charge of healthcare decisions? Who's in charge of property or money decisions? These are topics that the last episode of the SSA program dealt with in more detail. But we also have to think about the cost of care, the uncertain financial or real estate markets, and then what's happening with all of our personal money and our income and our assets and so on. The next slide shows that the biggest challenge that I think seniors and their families have is across all of these different frameworks, things that are happening in the environment, and challenges that we have when we're looking at our own household situation. None of these are aligned. And the way that I've put this slide together for everybody, it just acknowledges the challenge for decision makers and families to be able to come up with an easy path forward, because oftentimes it's the senior and the families themselves that are responsible for translating all of these different worlds to be able to make good and effective decisions. And that's my first opportunity to compliment everybody in the audience for reaching out to SSA in a program like this to try to make better sense of the environment, the way that it's changing right now, what's important to me about 2020 and the years ahead. And I'm glad that everybody's here, because the program and the 6 speakers should be able to start filling in some of these gaps to a greater degree. Following my presentation, Natalie Page will be talking about Medicare, Medicaid, and planning along those lines in different settings of care. And I'm really excited about Helen and her comments at the tail end of the presentation, speaking about different housing options in Alexandria. But back to my presentation, the next slide is a little bit closer to the world that I live in. As Mary Lee was talking in my introduction, I'm a partner in a wealth management firm, and we have a lot of financial planners that help families try to sort through these things. And what the slide is showing you now is a typical financial planning timeline most people understand starts with planning through the years that you're still working, and then retirement, and then there's some planning about what happens at the end of your life. That's usually the space that most people understand a financial planning timeline. But the next slide really talks more about the reality, the updated financial plan that I want to make sure everybody recognizes on the audience. This is what interrupted planning looks like, where sometime into retirement, what happens when changes in health starts impacting the priorities that we have and the circumstances that we have to make some decisions. Notice 2 things have changed here. A lot of times family go from planning ahead with a higher degree of certainty to reacting and trying to make some sense of changes, both in health and decision-making in the environment and whatnot. And there's the quote that I have in here. I want you to think that in circumstances like this, the job of the money has changed. The liquidity, the income that people need to be able to finance the cost of care and the standard of living while still paying attention to legacy priorities, those things a lot of times change. And on the next slide, don't forget, this is Senior Law Day, the job of the estate plan and all the documents that you put together, hopefully with the advice of a good attorney. The job of the estate plan has changed. No longer are we planning ahead for the possibility of some contingency that could impact decision-making. Sometimes we have to be taking new roles and responsibilities for folks that might not be as able to make decisions for themselves. So my comments in this first portion of the presentation really walks through what are the best ways to be able to make decisions when you have so many of these different variables swimming at the same time. Marshall, go to my next slide. This is a piece, I'm not going to steal too much of Natalie's thunder, but when the healthcare stuff happens, families look to senior housing and healthcare professionals for advice and direction. And I also want to credit Senior Services of Alexandria for being a trusted resource for decades about getting better information about advice and direction between home and community-based care, skilled and not skilled care, treatment versus comfort care, and so on. And my bullet on the bottom, remember, families oftentimes assume that all of these different expenses in these different categories is covered by Medicare or by insurance or sometimes Medicaid. So listen carefully for the presentation that follows mine when Natalie goes into that in a little bit more detail. On my next slide, let's also acknowledge it's difficult to make decisions when there's a change in health and you're not exactly sure how long somebody might live. You're also not sure how long somebody might need help or assistance and what kind of assistance that might be. In the era of COVID, we're asking a lot of questions about, is it safe to even interact with professional caregivers, whether you're bringing that into the home or you're thinking of taking a look at an assisted living facility or moving somewhere outside of the home. COVID has changed a lot of the way that we think about these kinds of transitions, and that is impeding effective decision making. And this last bullet, I always want to acknowledge, what does this do to our decision making psychologically? Well, what we know is in the absence of certainty, there's a tendency to procrastinate until better information or more current information presents itself. And I would offer this observation to our audience. A lot of times when there's transition with healthcare, families are not given all of the information that they need about how long somebody might live or how much help they might need right in the beginning. And one of the realities that we've all got to make decisions through is making the right choices with the best information that we've got. And the rest of the program today, I think, will be able to speak to that to a greater degree. On my next slide, this is an important point. What seniors sometimes don't realize when there's a tendency to procrastinate amid all this uncertainty is in the very middle, sometimes options that might be available to you are taken away while people are waiting for better information. And through Natalie's comments and through Helen's comments, I want you to listen carefully that if some of the different options might be an appropriate path for you with keeping you safe and independent in your own home or thinking of different kinds of transitions, just make sure that you understand what are the circumstances where some of those options which might be right for you could be taken away. A good example would be people moving into a retirement community that has a continuing care or life care options. Sometimes people need to be really healthy to move into one of those communities. Natalie's also going to talk a little bit about Medicaid and nursing facilities and when options are the best for circumstances like that as well. Helen's got some good comments about the availability of different housing options as well. But just be aware that sometimes there's a cost of procrastinating making a plan where options are taken away. The next slide. So what do? I'm a planner. I'm a partner in a big planning and wealth management firm. So this should not surprise you, audience. My advice is you should make a plan. And I'll give you the idea of what a plan really entails. It should be written down. It should be shared with loved ones and your advisors. And the most important thing, it should be understandable. Without translation, you should be able to express the things that are important to you and be able to give authorization to folks to be able to execute decisions according to those priorities. My next slide. Seniors, I think, always are best advised to assemble a team that coordinates around all the things that are important to you in the circumstances that you're in. And I think an anchor of all of this, it is Senior Law Day, a good estate, a good elder law attorney should be an anchor with the legal documents and the kind of advice that's provided. And then surrounding them with advocates, caregivers, healthcare providers, and financial advisors as appropriate to help families sort out the best way to pay for any type of care that might be needed. On my next slide, this is really the graphic that I really wanted to close my initial comments on. One of the things that families sometimes need to be reminded is that as things change in their life, so too do priorities sometimes change. And this graphic really represents on the blue that you see on the far left. This is a representation of the puzzle of different priorities that families might have that are really important. The idea of leaving a legacy, the idea of maintaining a standard of living, or of living in a particular house or traveling or whatnot. My heartbeat in the middle with the little COVID there, what it represents is how things can change in a period where healthcare circumstances are shifted. And what I want to introduce is sometimes families don't anticipate that there might be new priorities that enter into the decision making at that exact moment. Suddenly, it might be extremely important to stay with a spouse, or to be closer to family, or to make sure that we're socialized with our faith community no matter what, or that we want to maintain a very high quality of care. What we need to do when we're thinking about good decision making is anticipate the need to put a new puzzle together and a new set of priorities. I want to just make sure everybody recognizes that the idea of being dynamic in the way we're thinking about our most important things is something that we keep in mind in a good decision-making process. And then to close, and with one last resource on my next slide, one of the things that I just point the audience to, part of my responsibility is to make sure that there are resources that can get into some more details about what's good planning with liquidity, with taxes, with investments and whatnot. In the time that I have apportioned today, these 15 minutes, it's really about effective decision making. Not able to get into as much of those things. Maybe we'll be able to have time and questions, but I did want to call the audience's attention to the website that we've got, lifecareaffordability.com. There's plenty of resources there that can get into more specifics about different circumstances with solo agers or couples or intergenerational housing, and all the different ways that we might be able to plan to make sure people are able to afford the priorities that they've got. With that, that's my time. And one of the things that Mary Lee wanted to make sure is we stick around for questions afterwards, but that's my prepared comments, and thanks very much. And I'll introduce my colleague, Natalie Page, and elder law attorney extraordinaire. Natalie.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for your comments. Tom always does such a great job of setting things up and reminding us that we need to plan, and then we need to be prepared for our plan to need to be changed. I want to apologize to everybody. I just, as Tom was starting to speak, finished with a root canal, and my dentist is being kind enough to loan me his conference room to be able to do this presentation. So if I am slurry, I apologize. I will do my best to speak slowly and clearly. If we could have the next slide, Marshall. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about different ways to pay for different types of care, but the core of my presentation today is actually going to be about kind of myths and misconceptions, particularly about Medicare and Medicaid. And it is really going to tie into Tom's comments about needing to plan. I think in this particular area, there's a lot that people think they know, but that they don't know. And there's a lot of labyrinthine rules. So I wanted to talk about some of those myths surrounding Medicare and Medicaid. But first of all, from my perspective, generally speaking, the kinds of care that we're typically looking at are short-term care rehabilitation after needing some kind of surgery, or other procedure where hospital care is not really suitable, but neither necessarily is in-home care, at least for a short period of time. Assisted living, where you're receiving assistance with some activities of daily living or some things that need to be done, but are mostly living independently. Long-term care, where you are really receiving custodial care, receiving assistance with a lot of activities of daily living. And then, of course, in-home care, which the level of care, of course, can be assisted living, and it can be a much higher level of care as well. If we could have the next slide, please, Marshall. So the difference between Medicare and Medicaid in terms of what they pay for is often misconstrued. So Medicare is a health insurance program, and most of us know it is a federal health insurance program. It's not means tested, and there's two main parts. Part A is your hospital care, and Part B is your preventative or medically necessary care. So basically going to the hospital and going to the doctor. Many people assume that Medicare will pay for long-term care, or what Medicare calls custodial care, which is where you need assistance with living. You're not able to live independently, even with a little bit of support. You need a lot of support. And that's usually assistance with more than 2 or 3 of the activities of daily living, which are things like bathing, eating, toileting, mobility. Medicare does not pay for those. What Medicare pays for in a facility situation is short-term care or rehabilitation. There are some requirements surrounding that, and the main requirements are that your doctor certifies that you need that kind of care, so skilled nursing care or rehabilitation care that can only be provided in that institutional setting, and you must have been admitted to the hospital for 3 or more days. And that is the piece that really trips a lot of people up, because it has to actually be an admission. It can't be outpatient care, and it can't be observation status care. And unfortunately, observation status looks a lot like, and in fact can look identical to, an admission. So you need to make sure that you are investigating whether you're fully admitted to the hospital. A note on TRICARE. TRICARE is also health insurance and does not have a long-term care or custodial care benefit. And that's another thing that I see a lot, is that people assume that TRICARE will cover long-term care, and it will not. So Marshall, if we could have the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Medicaid is and then some of our myths and misconceptions. So Medicaid is a federally and state funded program. It's locally administered, and it's the payer of last resort for long-term care. It is means tested, and you have to qualify medically for it. And to qualify medically for it, you do actually have to have someone from your county or city, Department of Health and Human Services, come and do a evaluation and make a recommendation to determine whether you actually qualify medically for that long-term care. You also have to qualify financially, and that's $2,000 in countable assets. But some assets are not countable. And so one of the things that I want to caution people about when they're thinking that they're going to need long-term care is, I do have people who come to me that say, I've spent everything down, I have $2,000 left, and now I need Medicaid. And maybe they haven't spent it down in a way that is going to give them the maximum benefit. And so you want to make sure that you're talking to people who understand the Medicaid program far enough in advance to make sure that if you do need to do that spin down, you're doing it in the best possible way, but also keeping in touch with someone like Tom who's going to help you really maybe try to plan ahead to not need Medicaid. Then we have a 5-year look back on gifting or other uncompensated transfers for Medicaid. So a lot of people don't realize that one way to spin down the assets to $2,000 that is prohibited is to give that money away, buy a child a house, buy a child a car, sell a child a house for under fair market value. All of those things are uncompensated transfers and will result in a penalty period. If we could have the next slide, please, Marshall. So Medicaid myths and misconceptions. I wanted to start with things surrounding the home and home care because I think with COVID, people are really rethinking congregate care and moving into facilities or CCRCs. Although CCRCs, I think, have been pretty safe overall, but nevertheless, I think people are really reconsidering staying at home or moving in with family. And Rachel Baer did an excellent presentation last week about the legal aspects of moving in with family. So I'm not going to talk about that. But in terms of Medicaid in your home, so a lot of people will say Medicaid will take my home. Medicaid will not come and take your home. You don't have to do a deed to transfer it to Medicaid. You may or may not have to sell your home and use the proceeds for your care. But in terms of making a deed of transfer to Medicaid, you don't have to do that. As long as you, a spouse, or a dependent live in your primary home, that is an excluded asset. And a dependent can include dependent adult children, disabled adult children. So again, you need to be careful when deciding whether you need to sell your home or making the assumption that you are that the value of that home is a countable asset. Under certain circumstances, you may even be able to transfer that home to a caregiver child. Now, those are some pretty strict parameters for that. The caregiver child has to have lived with you for at least 2 years and provided care that has kept you from needing to go to a nursing facility for at least a year. There's a lot of paperwork and certifications that have to be provided with that. But it is something that should be kept in mind, particularly if people are trying to stay in the home and keep the home for family. Two more things about the home. Please do not sell your home to pay for long-term care until you've consulted with an attorney who has experience dealing with Medicaid. The home is likely to be an exempt asset, but as soon as you convert it into cash, it is not an exempt asset. And the same thing with your mortgage. Don't pay your mortgage down until you've consulted with someone who knows what they're doing, simply because there are asset limits in some cases for the exclusion of that home. I'm sorry, equity limits in some cases. If we can have the next slide, please. All right, so misconceptions. Medicaid will not pay for in-home care. In fact, there are waivers available to help pay for in-home care. The requirements to qualify for those waivers are the same as the requirements to qualify for institutional care. The downside to waivers is that Medicaid, you have to work with Medicaid approved providers who will accept the Medicaid reimbursement rate. It can be hard to find those providers. There are circumstances under which an adult child can qualify to be a provider approved for Medicaid payment, so that can be helpful. Another myth that I really see a lot is Medicaid will pay for assisted living. That is not true. Medicaid is a long-term care payment program. Medicaid, your spouse will get to keep their income. If your spouse remains in the community and you are in a facility or receiving Medicaid waivers, your income less $40 a month will go to pay for that, but your spouse will be able to keep their income. Both my spouse and I have to spend everything for me to qualify for Medicaid. No, the spouse can keep half of the couple's accountable assets up to $128,640 in 2020. Again, though, that's doing that division and assigning those assets. That is something that you really want to make sure that you consult with a attorney that has a lot of experience in planning for Medicaid. Because there's a lot to know about what's countable, what's not countable, and how to deal with some of those assets and how to spend the assets that need to be spent. Unfortunately, in Virginia, your retirement accounts are countable assets. That's not true in all states, but it is true in Virginia. Okay, if we could have the next slide, please. There's a lot more, as you can see, to talk about with Medicaid. I've outlined this pretty well. I do want people to understand very clearly that being estranged from a spouse or having a spouse's assets in separate names does not mean they will be countable. A married couple's assets are countable as a married couple, regardless of how they're held. Putting assets joint with another person will not exclude those assets from being countable. And in fact, part of the assets put in joint names with another person may actually wind up being considered an uncompensated transfer. The last thing is, if you give away assets, yes, there is that 5-year look back period, but that does not necessarily mean you have to wait 5 years in order to apply. So again, just because you gave away assets 2 years ago and then you realize that you need to apply for Medicaid for assistance with long-term care expenses, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. And again, that's just something that you need to talk to a qualified Medicaid planner, which is really just someone that has a lot of experience in that. And that's really part of the team that Tom is talking about. If you do these things far enough ahead of time, you may set yourself up so that you don't need to worry about Medicaid, but you can also work with the team to make sure that in the event that you do need to apply for Medicaid, you've set things up as well as possible to provide for yourself and your spouse and your family. If we can have the next slide. And I am running short on time, of course. Okay, so assisted living. People often think that Medicaid will pay for assisted living or that there is a similar program to help pay for assisted living in Virginia. The only program for that in Virginia is the auxiliary grant. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that a lot of people consider this to be so limited as to be non-existent. There is an income and asset means test, and the maximum income is $1,702 a month. I don't see many people who qualify for that. The other issue with the auxiliary grant is that even if you do qualify, it can be difficult to find a placement. So one thing that I think that when you're working with someone like Tom, that you really need to be looking at is making sure that you're planning for that assisted living period. Fortunately, assisted living is a lot less expensive than long-term care. Nevertheless, it is expensive, and the cost can continue to go up over a period of time as you need more and more assistance in assisted living. I want to do a quick word about Veterans Affairs before I wrap up. Marshall, if we could have the next slide. So the Veterans Affairs benefits, they're means tested. They can be a little restrictive, but they are well worth keeping in mind. So you have a Veterans Affairs basic veterans or surviving spouses pension. There's there's a service requirement, and there's a break at September 1980 for what they're for. Veterans Affairs has outlined and provided dates for what counts as active service for different periods, and they are strict about those dates. You have to be 65 or older, totally or permanently disabled, or a patient in a nursing home, or otherwise receiving nursing care or receiving SSI or SSDI to receive the basic veterans or surviving spouses pension. The pension will reduce kind of on a sliding scale depending on how much income you have. So you may qualify for the pension, but actually not receive any money. That does not mean that you should not apply and then apply for aid and attendance or the housebound pension supplement if you qualify. Those can be very helpful in whether you're at home, whether you're in an assisted living situation, or whether you're in a long-term care facilities. And those benefits, you have a lot more discretion on how you actually use them. If we have the next slide, Marshall. My time is up. You have my contact details, and we will be sticking around for questions. Helen McIlvaine is up next, and she, as Marianne told you, is with the Housing Department and has more specific resources.
So thank you, Natalie and Tom. I'm both a panelist and a very interested audience member today. I am entering that glide path that Tom talked about. And like many of you, very interested in all of these topics. So I'm going to be talking today about some housing resources for seniors. Some are directly related to housing, and then some have other elements, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to you. So Marshall, if you can move to the next slide. First, let me tell you about the Office of Housing. We're a small department in the city. We have 15 full-time staff. Some of the things we do are developing affordable housing policy, providing loans typically to nonprofits or private developers so that they can produce or preserve affordable housing. We work with developers during the development review process to negotiate and secure affordable units within their development. We provide landlord-tenant services, including complaint resolution, mediation, relocation assistance, and then currently our office is very busy providing emergency rent relief to keep people in their homes through COVID-19. And particularly if you've experienced illness or income loss and you're a renter, you are very likely qualified for this assistance. We also conduct fair housing testing to make sure that people are not discriminated against in housing transactions, whether that's renting a unit or buying or selling a unit. And for all of you, elderliness is one of the categories protected under Virginia law. We also provide home purchase assistance, and I want to assure everyone today that many seniors have used our program to buy homes. So if you have not use the program but are income eligible, we are glad to provide assistance for certain homes in the city. And we also run a program to provide updates to your home, to make them accessible, to increase livability, or to address code issues. So we have a home rehabilitation loan program that I'll talk about later. And we provide accessibility modifications for apartments. One thing I always say is that we are not the housing authority. There's a different entity, the Alexandria Redevelopment and Housing Authority. They own and operate affordable housing as well. Some of it is public housing where the person pays 1/3 of their gross income, but they also own other affordable housing. So if you need to be in touch with them, we're very glad to make referrals to them. But they are for typically housing for people at some of the lowest income levels or disabled, unable to work. Next slide, Marshall. So just briefly, because it is obviously the issue of our time, I want to tell you a little bit about our emergency rental assistance program. And we are also working to both prevent evictions and foreclosures. So our office, through Action by City Council, is providing financial assistance to help lower the balances for renters who have not been able to pay their full rent. The payments are made on a renter's behalf directly to their landlord, and it serves seniors and anyone else who's experienced either a loss of income or a serious medical expense in 2020. And you apply by calling or online through the city's 311 system. And we have applications and all of the program materials in a variety of languages. So we would really appreciate your assistance. If you know of a neighbor or friend who may be having trouble, please encourage them to contact us. Having a legal status is not a requirement of the program, nor is it serving a particular income group. But we do want to make sure, since we know that many people are struggling to make their housing payments, to let them know. We're also an agency where we can make referrals to the Department of Community and Human Services and make sure people get other critical needs met, other basic needs. So that can be food, prescriptions. It usually includes diapers. That may not be of such great need for this audience, but we are glad to put you in touch with other assistance you may need. I wanted to let people know, if you don't already, that most mortgage lenders are offering forbearance, meaning that they will give you a 3-month or longer period where you do not need to make your mortgage payments, but you need to make these arrangements with your mortgage lender. And so it's important that you follow the procedure for requesting the relief. Okay, next slide. The other program that we have is called another program we have is called the Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program. And we are currently providing loans to help households get services to address issues from the recent flooding and storms, to increase energy efficiency and affordability of your home, to make your home more livable, and that includes a lot of things. It may include, for example, adding a bathroom to your main living level, as well as to help make homes accessible and to address code and safety issues. So if we are working with you, we will first sort of triage the issues, but addressing accessibility, code issues, safety issues first. And of course, the program's goal is to make sure that people, households that are income eligible, can remain safely and affordably in their homes. And we know that's of tremendous interest to most seniors. The home rehabilitation program looks at the equity you may have in your home and will typically make a loan up to the amount of that equity. So we find that a lot of long-time seniors have homes they've owned for a long time. They have a lot of equity, and so our program can be used to address and make improvements or necessary changes to your home. The loan is paid off. You make no payments until the home is sold or in 99 years. And so it's a great program because no interest accrues and there's no requirement for a payment until you actually sell your home. And you are allowed, a family member can inherit the home or buy the home from you, and the loan can be continued, because we know that many people really would like to see their home stay in the family. So the city's role in this program is to coordinate and basically manage the project for you. So we provide architectural and engineering services as needed. And then when it comes time to select a contractor, the owner is involved in that and makes the final decision on who will do the work. And if it's the type of project where you need to be relocated for some period of time, we help make arrangements for this. So I think that there are probably many people who have projects but are just overwhelmed by what is involved in finding the professionals needed and getting bids from a number of contractors and just figuring it all out. So I think this is a program that has a lot of excellent qualities for seniors. And the program is available to help in any kind of housing you might live in. It's also available to people who live in condominiums. And one of the things that comes up and can be a very big burden is if you are in a condominium and you are charged a special assessment for work. So our loans can also be used to help people pay for special assessments related to maintenance or repairs that need to be done to the condominium project as a whole, but every member or person who lives there is assessed. And again, I want to say we're seeing currently many requests based on floods and storm damage. And if you meet other eligibility requirements, we may be able to help you. Next slide, Marshall. So we also offer a rental accessibility modification program, and that acronym is RAMP. And so if you are a renter, the goal of the program is to help you remain safely and accessibly in your apartment. You do not have to pay anything for the improvements or accessibility modifications. Those are paid on your behalf through a grant. And we can do work that is up to $50,000 of modifications. And again, the city comes in and helps manage the professionals who are involved, the architect, and then again, we'll pick a contractor to do the services. We also, and we'll coordinate with the landlord for the work to be done and all of that. We can also reimburse the landlord if they have a contractor who can perform the work that's needed. So examples of what we've done at different apartment properties are exterior ramps, kitchen and bathroom modifications, expanding doorways and thresholds, and putting in visual alarms. But we're glad to work with you. Many people, of course, want bathroom and toilet and grab bars, very simple modifications, and we're very glad to do that. And we simply ask that the landlord keep the modifications in place and market the unit to others who can benefit from the improvements when you move out. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we also work with many seniors who are interested in becoming we call it first-time buyers, but it's basically anyone who has not owned a home in the past 3 years. And for many people, home ownership is really a great way to stabilize their housing costs. We know a lot of people like the ease of living in an apartment, but very often annually you're asked to, the rents increase and you're not sure what your housing costs will look like over time. So it may be that for you, owning is a good option. Again, our home ownership, it's available to those who are income eligible and can go up to $50,000. And again, no payments are due until the home is sold or in 99 years, but you must occupy the home. Right now, we have units that are available through the city's program, and those are usually resales of homes that we've previously assisted. In the past, we allowed people to buy any unit for which they were qualified for a mortgage. But right now, we've pulled back a little and we are offering resales of homes where we previously assisted them. Our program has been available for years, so they do come up, but you should be signed up for the city's e-news to learn about them. Okay, next slide, please. And I do mention there that the city has a large stock of condominiums, And that's very often a good option for seniors. The other thing, and I was pleased Natalie brought up how difficult it is sometimes to find a placement if you have an auxiliary grant. Over the last few years, we have been working very, very hard to get more auxiliary grant and affordable senior living options through some of the market rate projects that are being developed. So while our goal is to have an affordable assisted living facility at some time in the city, we are now getting units in all of the new projects that you may hear about. Some are with assisted living and some have memory care options. Most are planned for individuals with auxiliary grants, but others have a tiered system of payments that target people with middle incomes or higher incomes. And we have just a bunch of information available on our website. And most of my next few slides are take you to those resources. If you want to follow up, of course, you're also welcome to call us anytime. Next slide, please. So again, some of the websites or give us a call. Next one. And I understand that the slides will be posted to the website, so you will be able to go through these more carefully. We also have an excellent web page, and so we provide information about apartments in the city, condominiums, and how much they typically cost, as well as their fees. That's often a barrier. And again, going through some of the services that we offer. We also offer financial and budget counseling. And while I think you could not do better than to talk to Tom or Natalie, if you have a sort of short-term problem, we're glad to provide this kind of assistance to you for free. We also will, of course, work with you on foreclosure prevention, including modifications of your loan if that is a hardship for you. Next slide. Okay, and this last slide is just, again, several different ways to be in touch with us. Thanks, I've enjoyed being with you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
As we're all coming back on the screen, I did want to let you all know that we have only about 5 minutes. So Natalie, if you can field the questions that seem to be the most pressing, and hopefully we can get some quick answers before we wrap up.
Yep, I think we'll be okay. And most of the questions actually for Helen. The first question though is, are there any veterans benefits for someone who was a reserve officer but was not called to active duty? The veterans benefits that I'm aware of, the ones that I spoke about, do have an active duty requirement, and they also have a service during wartime requirement. The next question, and I think all the rest of the questions are actually for Helen. So Helen, we have a question. How do you define affordable housing?
So typically when we talk about affordable housing, we mean housing that has costs that a person who makes less, that are affordable to a person who makes less than approximately $60,000 or $65,000 a year. So we are focused on, developing rental and home ownership opportunities that a household that has $60,000 or $65,000 or less can afford to rent or buy.
Okay, I think that might answer our next question, which is there an income cap for affordable housing?
It varies, and again, a lot depends on your situation and how many people may be in your household. So all of this information is available on our website, but again, you're very welcome to call us and we can walk you through it.
Okay, and what are the eligibility requirements for home renovations, such as a new roof or replacement windows, and how long does it take?
So thank you for that question. Typically, what in the case of a home rehabilitation loan, we're really looking at what equity you have in your home. So it's not, there are certain income eligibility requirements. They're a little higher. They go up to $80,000 or so a year, but it's really based on how much equity is available in your home.
And I think this might be our last question. Are there any services available to income ineligible seniors?
Sure, and we can find out if you want to give us a call. It may vary based on what you need, but we're glad to point you in a direction or help provide information and referrals if you are not eligible for one of our programs. We work with a tremendous number of contractors and other folks in the field that just sometimes having a place to start is very helpful to people.
Okay.
With that, I think I'm going to have to jump in here because you guys have had so much wonderful information, and I want to thank you all for sharing it. To wrap things up here, as I mentioned at the start of the hour, everyone registered for the event will receive an email with links to the presentations and other important resources, and all of those resources and access to the city website so you can check out eligibility requirements. We'll also have them posted on the Senior Services of Alexandria website. And I did want to let you know that the Virginia Bar Association has recently published an updated version of this Seniors Virginians Handbook. It's a wonderful compilation of legal information and resources. We do have hard copies of the handbook, and they're available at all of the libraries in Alexandria at the Senior Information Corners, or you can pick them up at our office, which is located in Old Town at 206 North Washington Street. We're at Suite 301. There's a box right outside the door, so it's all contact-free handoff. Next week, our discussion is going to focus on the legal fundamentals that we all need to understand and implement to ensure that all of these plans that we've been talking about go off without a hitch. We have another great lineup of panelists. Gretchen Meinken is a partner in the firm of Wade, Grimes, Friedman, Meinken, and Leichner in Alexandria, and they specialize in estate planning and administration. Mary Horner will be the other panelist, and she's a staff attorney with Legal Services of Northern Virginia, and she's very active in representing older adults. Be sure to be on the lookout for the Zoom invitation that will come your way next week. And again, thank you to all our panelists, and thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend.